This episode is brought to you by our partnership with Kelly Education.
I always go back to, like, how did I feel? How was my first 2 years in the U.S.? One of the things I used to get in trouble was for self-control. Like, I got the system down, but at first, I was one of those students. So I always think of how was that little Odile in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I try to remember that when I'm expecting the same for my students. I'm like, okay, how was I?
Hi, friends. Welcome back for another episode of the Ignite Project podcast. We're so excited that you could join us today. And let me tell you, all of our guests, we say this every time, are incredible. I personally am a little biased with our guest today because I had the opportunity to meet her at our new teacher boot camp. So not only is she a new teacher, but she brings a wealth of experience with her. And so Odile Perez, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I feel like this is such a big honor. Thank you so much, Ms. Mallory. I'm excited to be here.
I feel like you're kind of part of the family now that we've had the new teacher boot camp. For those of you who don't know, that's usually a new teacher boot camp is when you are a career changer or a first year teacher. We have that in July. So you got to hang out with us virtually.
Yes.
In July. So different being on screen versus like in person.
Totally.
But we spend like 4 days with each other. But on top of that, that's how we met, and we just had a new teacher chat together just to kind of get to know one another. And through that chat, I learned so much about you.
It was so fun.
For those who are wondering what you do and who you are, just so they can kind of befriend you a little bit and not call you a stranger, you are an ESOL teacher at Garner Elementary. And so you come from a little bit of background. You are not an education background. So
No.
What was your original degree in?
My undergrad is in international business and Spanish.
Okay. And then this is what I found out and I love about you. I'm all about it. You went to school in London.
Yes, I did. So right after undergrad, my mentor was like, I was working and she's like, you need to go back to school. And I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. And I love global affairs. She's like, why don't you look at London? So with her guidance, I applied to London School of Economics and I did my master's in global politics and global civil society.
Yeah.
So it's a
It's
big
a mouthful.
mouthful. Global civil society. They would fail me if I can't even pronounce the master's.
No, when you told me that, I was like, I'm going to let her say that. And you were there for how long?
I was there for 4 years. So I did my undergrad, my grad, and then I got a job immediately after.
That's insane. And that's amazing because not only are you learning about different parts of global aspects of things, but you are like immersing yourself in a completely different culture. I know they speak English, but at the same time, it's just like the way they do things, the way they carry themselves, phrases and the terminology. Living in London.
Yes.
I mean, come on.
It was amazing. It was a great opportunity because my job in that particular season was to work with global agents, basically,
Okay.
in a program called Diaspora Volunteering Program. Okay. So it was immigrants, but basically diaspora, so someone who moves from a different country to another country, they relocate, and they would go back home. They had a specific skill, so we were talking about doctors or teachers who had a skill gained abroad and bring it back home. So we would have dialogues, and then when they go back to their home countries, they would transfer those skills that they saw were gapping and missing to bring education back in the UK. So it was a really cool.
Yeah, it sounds amazing.
It was amazing.
But really what captures my attention is you took parts of that when you decided to pursue like your long lifetime dream and goal to become a teacher. You brought some of that with you. Obviously being an ESOL teacher, having students who are immersing themselves in a different culture, maybe possibly even a different country, and just understanding what's going on around them, that's so powerful to bring that experience with you. So not everyone has to be an education major to bring that knowledge.
No, anyone who loves kids and who loves to share what they know, I think has a calling, can be a teacher.
So,
anyone who has that passion.
Yeah, and I think with that, today I really want to kind of focus on, we're talking about disciplining children and having the entire child in mind, the whole child in mind. Mm-hmm. And sometimes with that, there are things that we as teachers or even as children, miscommunication happens, there's misconceptions, misunderstandings that take place. And so that really can cause some division, especially building relationships with your students within the classroom. So first off, I want to kind of start off going back, New Teacher Boot Camp.
Okay.
Was there a strategy that has really helped, that you just took a hold of and has really helped you in working with your students, communicating with your students, that's been impactful?
First of all, I would say that if you are a new teacher and if you are even a returning teacher, do the boot camp. Because for me, it was life-saving. I think that I had the mindset to say, okay, I'm going to implement these strategies. If I had not been there, I think I would have been very lost. I mean, you, as a first-year student, you're a first-year teacher, you're really scared, you're nervous.
Yeah.
And obviously, you continue to learn throughout the year. But the skills that I gained before getting into the classroom really helped me be prepared the best I could.
Right.
So I gained so much. I love it. I love it. I do a lot of the green light, red light. You know, I'm not going to give it all away. But one of the things that I really took away is focusing on the positive. So we saw redirecting behavior. I love the videos that were shown and mirroring the good behavior, good practice that the teacher were doing. So for instance, rather than focusing on the student that is not following the champion rules, focusing on what the student is doing right. So for instance, I would say, Marjorie, I love how you're on target today. Yeah. And then that student is like, oh, okay, I love it. So yeah, I want to do the two. And actually, I've been implementing that. So,
Cool.
You know, sometimes your action is to focus on the student that is not doing the right thing.
So easy to do that. It's
right.
So easy. I think, and that, it sticks out as a green thumb, especially when you're already overworked, frustrated, or you're just really looking at that follow through, finding, you know, that those students who are following through with your task and direction, and to how powerful it is that you're retraining your mind, your thoughts from the get-go, from the beginning, to make sure you're implementing that in your classroom.
Exactly. And even how you set up your classroom, because you can set your classroom, which we learn with you, from a preventative or to a celebratory approach. Right. What am I going to celebrate? What am I going to reward? And so if you have that in your environment from the beginning, your students are going to be like, okay, she's going to highlight, she's going to reward the good behavior rather than disciplining the whole time.
Right. So coming back to when we focus on the not so approving behavior that a student maybe is doing and is unaware, oftentimes there's barriers, that miscommunication. So I know that with the students that you work with, or any student that we work with, we could give a direction, right? And then all of a sudden we know that they're not following through with that direction. I know that as a teacher of my past, I wanted to immediately either repeat myself quickly. I did not want to wait and kind of see if they would catch in on some of those clues. But what might cause some of these barriers where students are either misunderstanding or there's miscommunication happening?
There's so many things that could be a barrier. In my particular specialty or work, there's an ESOL, there's so many different things. Could be a language barrier,
right.
Cultural barrier, or just a system barrier. Because, for instance, something that we learned in the boot camp is silent solo, right? That's very common.
Yeah.
But if a student is just coming into the U.S., their system, they have maybe never done silent solo. They usually probably did a lot of collaborative teamwork because there's a different cultural background. So we have to be careful of what we think is normal or what should we expect the student to be doing. One example, for instance, is when we think, okay, my students should be able to follow along with technology, right?
Yeah.
We're
surrounded by it, right?
Yes.
We think everybody knows how to do it. A child knows how to operate. But I mean, my nephews can type in my sister-in-law's password on her phone and open up apps. We just assume that they're born with it.
Exactly. The same here. My nephews too, and he knows some tricks that I don't even know, right? But for instance, if a student just came into the U.S., do we know if they've been exposed to an iPad, to an iPhone? Is it something that they're used to? I had an instance recently where a student, she's never worked on an iPad before.
Wow,
She was coming from a different environment. So if I was her teacher, and it's common that we just follow along, but she's never even used it. So how can she follow along, or how can he follow along? And those are things that we have to check. Where is my student coming from?
Right.
What is his background or her background?
Right.
What am I assuming that is universal that may not be universal from a student from a different country?
And kind of being willing to take a step back and watch that take place, where another student can kind of show them, plugging in an iPad, right? When you're talking about where it gets plugged in, how it gets plugged in, we kind of make that statement, go plug it in. And then all of a sudden we turn our backs and we're on to the next thing. But being able to have, like what you're saying, those things set in place where that student doesn't necessarily feel left out or feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail from the get-go because I don't know how to do this, or what even is this device?
Exactly. Like, for instance, if you're coming from Europe, right? One of the
Right.
things that really was like minimum, but it made a big difference is that the prongs in the cord to plug in are very different.
Oh,
They're not the
yes.
same. They're not the same. So if I'm going to plug in, I'm like, oh, wait, it's missing 3. So that's the same thing. So even when we're having a new student, if we have a system, we should walk them through the first week, the first 2 weeks. This is how we do it, but with a lot of love and caring and showing them. It may be something very simple, but it can be a big difference maker.
Right.
And that student's attitude.
So what are some things that you've noticed in some of your students that maybe are very common that maybe as teachers or educators we need to kind of maybe keep in mind?
Oof, that's a loaded one.
You're like, there's a list. Top three. No.
Top 3. Well, one thing I could say is it depends who you're working with,
Okay.
right? No student
It's
is
the
the same.
same,
We know that, right? No,
Get to
not
know the
every
student.
size fits the same.
Right.
No one's it's not the same size. But we need to get to know the student. But for instance, if I'm working with a Hispanic student and he is or she is very loud, right?
Right.
Very talkative, does their work, but they're talkative. Do I want to understand which background was it normal for them to do their work and talk when they're not supposed to?
Yeah.
And redirecting them.
Because is that causing a distraction, or is it simply just like a way of how they're communicating and processing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or is it because they are used to
the environment?
the environment being talkative even while you're doing your work, right? So I have to make sure that I understand that. And also that I make sure that I'm not generalizing, because not all Hispanics are the same.
True, yes.
So if you're from the Caribbean, you're not the same that if you're from South America.
Right.
So it's different. It's just from one community. So one thing I would check is, am I understanding the student as a whole? Second of all, am I understanding the student's needs? If they're new to the country, right?
Yeah.
Are they going to a big transition? Because now this student is making new friends. Probably their family dynamics has totally shifted.
Right.
Do they have everything they need to succeed? So understanding them and their family dynamics, it's really important.
Yeah.
And then also I would add, if there are classroom management tools that you want in your classroom that to be followed, are they understanding why?
That's so good. Because I know that oftentimes we share this philosophy of, like, as a teacher, you want them to do something and you know there's a purpose behind it, but do they know that purpose? Do they fully understand what that purpose is going to lead to? And if they don't, having that conversation of, I'm asking you to do this, do you know why I'm asking you to do this? And kind of moving forward with that conversation is so powerful. That why.
Exactly.
For sure.
Because we need to paint the success. What is our goal? What are we
Right.
trying to do as a classroom? And you're part of that classroom. You're part of our success. But if I don't understand it, I'm dealing with all these changes in my life. Even if I've just moved from up north, it's different environment. But if I am invited to be part of the winning team and I understand the reasoning, I'm more likely to participate.
Right.
And to comply, right?
Yeah. So talking about shifting from student focus, what they're coming from thinking about, to teachers, what are some things that teachers might be doing? And again, we're going to generalize this because I know I'm going to throw myself into the table first and foremost before anybody. I've done so many things that later on as a mentor, somebody's approached me, or just through experience and looking back and saying, oh, that was me. That was not the student. So what are some things that maybe teachers are doing that we're doing out of habit, or maybe not being aware of, that's only frustrating the situation for those students?
And it goes back to what we talked about in the boot camp. is assuming the best. Sometimes we assume the worst. When the student is not participating, I had a case that happened to me, and I tried to be very aware, but this happened recently to me. The student, we had small group, and I tried to be very inclusive, but this student was a little bit hesitant. She was like, I'm not going to engage that much.
Yeah.
And I was just assuming that she was shy.
Right.
So I'm like, no, okay. And I was like, she's just timid. I'm just going to
work.
pull
It out of her.
Little by little. And I'm going to keep pushing just little by little. And then I had a dialogue with her homeroom teacher. And she said, no, Miss Perez, this student's going through this and this and this and this and this and this. And all these things that I would never think that someone in our district would have to face.
Yeah. And that we are burnt out, we are tired, there's a little time to process, we're going from one thing to the next. And so keeping that positive in mind. So as we're disciplining students or talking through with them, what are some strategies that you would recommend as a teacher's perspective that we don't get to this point where we're like, oh, I wish I would have known that, or I look back like myself 3 years ago and I'm like, I made a mistake and I can't come back from that. So what are some strategies, and before applying a discipline, we know that there's like definitely you crossed the line, there was a boundary, there is a disciplinary action that needs to take place. But what are some strategies in understanding the child before going straight to that disciplining?
First, take a break.
Yeah.
Walk away. Take a break. Don't go from the emotion. Don't let the emotion lead you.
Yeah.
Take a break. You don't have to correct right there.
It's so hard.
It's so hard. I mean, I don't know if I can say that, but I just start in my mind. I do a meditation. I pray. I'm like, okay, let me just recollect my emotions. And in this moment, I'm not gonna give the power away to something external. So I regroup internally, and then So
what is the student doing while you're doing that?
When I'm recollecting, I'm like, oh, I will go back to my iPhone. Okay, right now, let's say Peter, his name is Peter. Thank you very much. At this moment, can you please have a seat? We'll have a dialogue, we'll have a dialogue at some point.
Okay.
I'm giving him that direction. I'm pausing.
And then when you're ready,
when I'm ready,
have time, you'll come back and revisit.
I'll come back.
Yeah.
And it can be that same day, or it can be next day. I've had that moment where I have had to, in that moment, I'm really like, I want to say everything on my mind.
You are not alone.
But then what I do is I take a break. Then I think through the process of the situation, and then the next day I'll have a one-on-one with that student.
Yeah, my coworker had a great idea. We had this back office, so it reminds me of when you have that moment, we would just kind of say, instead of sending the kid back there, we would oftentimes, like, the kids would continue working, we would say that, making sure it's just to that individual, they're not being called out in front of the class, and then we would go back there, and sometimes I would be like, and I would process with her and be like, this is what's happening. Please give me some guidance. And she just kind of like, well, like, you can be back here. They don't know why you're back here. Just take a couple deep breaths. Let them kind of independently work where they're focused, and then readdress and continue on with the lesson. And then when you're ready, go to that student and talk to that student when you need or have that opportunity. So I love that it can be like this personal thing of redirecting the student and you taking that break as well. Adam, we had him on our show early on, and he was kind of saying the same thing. Don't ever allow your emotions to control the situation.
Exactly.
Like, adults, more than anybody, need the break than the student, because the adults are the one that are finding that solution, and sometimes maybe that right moment is not the time to find that solution.
Exactly. And if you allow the student to know that you can be triggered, then that student can have the power to get your attention that way.
Right.
That way he knows that you're going to react. So they're very intelligent. I'm not saying that all students they're doing out of a malice.
Well, when you're in frustration, communication's not solid.
Exactly.
Like, we know that.
Exactly.
It's not clear. It's not organized. And so as you haven't processed through the facts, and so being able to settle, then you can come to the table and talk about maybe where that miscommunication was. We often in our office use the Brene Brown phrase, like the story I'm telling myself, and talk through. As an adult, like stating that and kind of talking to them and allowing them to share their response. And that's where you find out maybe the student doesn't know what an iPad is.
Exactly. Or maybe the student is not used to this dynamic between teacher and student. They have a different dynamic in their background. So
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, you have to understand, like, some students, for instance, there's like you don't talk back to a teacher, or maybe they do talk back. It depends on the dynamic that they're that they're used to, and so you can say, this is how I expect it. There's something I do. This is how we expect it here because of this and this and this, and I expect you to comply because of this and this and this. Can we work together?
Right.
Yeah, and
and talk through that.
And work through it and talk. Communication. I think that when we have communication and we have dialogue and we set common ground rules, we can work together.
Absolutely. And it's going to take some time, or especially when you're not used to the environment or the student has not yet developed a relationship with you. So that may take time until you get to that like in sync mode where like magic is happening.
Exactly. And one thing too, I think that what I try to do every day is 3 things that I'm grateful for.
Nice. I love that.
Yes, because
does everybody go through that? Everybody in your class talk about it?
No,
just
because personally.
Okay.
That's a good idea. We are doing a what are you thankful for activity this week for for Thanksgiving. But if we could, I think that's a great idea. I'm going to implement that every day. What are you thankful for? I just have little sessions with our students, but I think that for me, I have to do that because if I am excited and if I am happy and if I am feeling passionate about my job, it's going to be easier for me to teach.
I was just reading out of a book. They mentioned Brene again, but the book wasn't from Brene. It was from Luke Norworthy, I believe, and he was talking about a quote from Brene, and he was saying that oftentimes we assume that gratitude and joy can be separate or compartmentalized, and really they're not. Anybody that you see who is actively practicing gratitude, like you are, saying what you're grateful for, 3 things every single day, is coinciding with joy. There's more joy that's present in their life. And so when it only makes sense if the teacher is actively practicing gratitude and trying to get to understand the whole student, the whole child, and where they're coming from, then they're more likely to have a better experiencing with the communication factor. They're less likely to have some of those barriers and just to understand both sides.
Exactly.
I love that.
And imagine if every time I try to do this with our students is, thank you for doing that. Thank you for participating today. Thank you for reading that verse.
They have a choice.
Yes.
And they are actively participating in that choice when they go through that activity or task.
Especially ESOL students, it's really intimidating to read in a language that you don't
I cannot imagine. I tried to teach myself German at a young age. It stopped. Exactly. That was when cassette tapes were around.
And even when you go into a room and you're like the first person there, you're a new person, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so, like, you get nervous, right?
That's why I love that you like went to school in London, because I'm like, regardless, you put yourself through that for 4 years, you immersed yourself in that, and it's got to be so intimidating and scary. But how amazing is that these students have somebody who's gone through a similar situation that can talk them through, and a colleague can rely on you to provide some of that feedback so that you can better help the success of your student, your classroom, the school.
Exactly. I think awesome. my biggest experience is that I was an ESOL student myself.
Yeah.
And I always, go back to that. I always go back to that. I always go back to, like, how did I feel? How was my first 2 years in the U.S.? One of the things I used to get in trouble was for self-control. Like, I got the system down, but at first, I was one of those students. So I always think of how was that little Odile in the beginning. Yeah. And I try to remember that when I'm expecting the same for my students. I'm like, okay, how was I? When my mom had to come in and educate me, the system is different. You don't do this way. But it took me 2 years or 3 years to really understand.
And I think for someone who has never experienced that, like, I can say that probably my fuse would be done after a couple months. Like, so that's so powerful that you have your life experience to pour into these students, and that they have somebody who's actually connecting with them based on their own story.
Yeah, and I think that if you're not, like, you're like, oh, well, if I'm not from that background, I can't. Yeah. Well, maybe.
Yeah, what can we do? Exactly.
If you have never been in that experience, go to a different part of the town that you don't understand that culture in the town. and immerse yourself for a day there or an hour. Florida is so diverse that we can
Polk
find
County alone, you can drive 10 minutes that way and you're in a different area.
Oh yeah, I'm from Orlando and I'm like, wow, this is so different. Even like, wow, the way they do things is different. So even, it may not be a language thing, but it may be a philosophy of life. Being uncomfortable is the best way to learn.
Ah, yes, I love it. All right, so we love to ask every single guest the same question. It's part of kind of what makes our podcast special because we get to hear passion from you and kind of connect with other teachers and educators within our area. But if you really could pick one thing in education to ignite and spark a change, what would it be? So I want to ignite what?
I would love, there's so many things I want to ignite, but I would love to ignite dialogues around diversity. I think that while having meaningful dialogues, we can really truly understand each other and understand that we're all different. Even if we look the same, we have different backgrounds. And while we operate from understanding and dialogue and conversation, we can truly be bridges through our communities. And when we build those bridges is where we can really truly impact all the students, our communities, and have a good and powerful educational background and community working together.
What an incredible answer. I love that. I think that we know every single person on this planet is different. So we know that every single conversation and experience is different too, and we've got to have those conversations in order to kind of build some of those relationships and bridge those gaps. So.
And we can find that we're more alike than we think.
Yes. You're not an island. You are not an island.
Exactly.
You heard it first. We are not an island.
We have so many things in common that sometimes we don't even know, and then operating from there can build such
I feel like meeting you at the new teacher boot camp and all that stuff, I would have never guessed that you did school in London, and just having the 30 minutes to talk to you, it was so powerful and enlightening. So I'm so happy that you joined us here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been so exciting. I'm so grateful to meet you and to be part of this awesome district. I'm so grateful that together we can be an impact for our students and for our community.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Are you fired up? You can continue to fuel the fire by connecting with us here in Teacher Engagement. Every month, we host virtual all-teacher seminars, and we also have ongoing programs designed to support teachers wherever they're at in their teaching career. Whether you're a new teacher or a teacher leader, there is a way to get plugged in. Follow us on social media at TeachEngagePCPS to see all that we have going on. Let's keep that spark alive and join forces with others who have chosen to stay ignited.
Thanks for joining us. You can subscribe to the Ignite Project on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, or watch online at the Polk County Public Schools YouTube channel. To learn more about the Ignite Project and other Polk County Public Schools podcasts, go to polkschoolsfl.com/podcasts.